Imagine it's April 1940. You're at the New York World's Fair surrounded by the world of tomorrow. You walk into the Westinghouse Pavilion and see a towering 8-foot-tall chrome cabinet topped with a cube of glowing light bulbs. It weighs over a ton and hums with the sound of 116 mechanical relays. This isn't a calculator, it's a challenger. It invites you to play the ancient game of Nim. You press a button, the machine thinks. Its relays clicking like a mechanical heartbeat before it makes its move. Little do you know, you are standing in front of the Nimatron, the great-grandfather of the computer game, and the history of interactive entertainment has just begun. We'll dive into that and more on This Week in Video Game History. Welcome back to This Week in Video Game History. I'm your host, Doug Coleman, and I am absolutely fired up for today's episode covering March 30th through April 5th. This week is an absolute titan in the industry calendar. We're going to be sprinting through a timeline of 7 legendary releases, from the pixel perfection of Final Fantasy VI to the mobile magic of Monument Valley. Then we're going deep. We'll look at why the Nimatron was slowed down to protect human egos, how a simple hyphen in a dusty motor lodge defined the fate of Microsoft, and the April Fool's merger that created the RPG powerhouse Square Enix. Grab your controller, press start to continue. Before we begin our deep dives, let's take a look at the software that defined this week across 5 decades of history. We've got everything from cockpit tilting arcade ports to the birth of the modern esports scene. Let's go. First up, we're taking to the sky. Originally a sit-down arcade beast from Sega, Afterburner made its Japanese NES debut on March 30th, 1989. Developed by Sunsoft, this was the legendary feat of programming. While the NES couldn't quite handle the arcade's rotating cockpit, developers managed to keep the signature sprite scaling feel. It was notoriously difficult with 22 levels that challenged even the best pilots, but for 1989, having that much speed in your living room was a revolution.
Capcom presents
Ready?
Next, we're taking it to the Dreamcast. March 30th, 2000, Japan got its hand on the home version of Marvel vs. Capcom 2. This is the holy grail for many fighting game fans. With a massive roster of 56 characters and that iconic "I'm gonna take you for a ride" jazz fusion soundtrack, it defined the 3-on-3 tag team era. It was so popular, it remained a staple, the Evolution Championship Series, for nearly 2 decades.
Wait, got it. Ah, hell, this thing ain't gonna hold. Damn, you're ugly.
March 31st, 1998 is a date that changed PC gaming forever. Blizzard Entertainment released StarCraft, shifting away from the high fantasy of Warcraft to a gritty, asymmetrical sci-fi universe. By giving the Terrans, Zerg, and Protoss completely different mechanics, Blizzard created a balance so perfect it basically birthed professional esports in South Korea, where players became national celebrities and games were broadcast on 3 different TV channels.
For sure. I don't know about the rest. We got a big old buttload of floating debris out here. Woo-wee! We hit pay dirt this time for sure.
Metal Slug.
On April 2nd, 1996, SNK brought the pixel art masterpiece Metal Slug to the Neo-Geo AES home console. While most of the world was obsessed with early 3D polygons, Metal Slug doubled down on hand-drawn, hyperactive 2D animation. Fun fact, because so few copies were produced for the home market, an original English AES cartridge can now fetch over $20,000 on the secondary video game collecting market. Jumping forward to 2014, Monument Valley landed on iOS on April 3rd and proved that mobile games could be high art. Inspired by MC Escher's impossible geometry, you navigated Princess Ida through optical illusions that made your brain melt in the best way possible. It was so successful that developers recouped their entire development cost in just 2 weeks. Don't call it a port. On April 4th, 1997, North America received Doom 64. Unlike the previous Doom games, this was a dark, atmospheric sequel developed by Midway with all new graphics and a sinister, ambient soundtrack. It was originally meant to be a launch title, but id Software insisted on redesigning the levels to ensure it was the ultimate 64-bit horror experience. Finally, the RPG that changed everything. On April 2nd, 1994, Final Fantasy VI launched in Japan. Known as Final Fantasy III in the States, it ditched the Crystals narrative for a Magitech world where machinery and magic coexist. With 14 playable characters and themes like global apocalypse and chemical warfare, it remains a consistent contender for the best RPG of all time. I started this podcast to combine two of my favorite loves, video games and history. And the great thing about this show for me is how I am constantly learning new things about the industry that I have loved since my earliest days. I absolutely love uncovering new lore to add to this podcast, and today's episode is no different. Today I am talking about the first electronic device ever created for the sole purpose of playing a game. Let's head back to the 1940s World's Fair. Imagine standing next to Westinghouse's other star attraction, Electro, a 7-foot-tall Art Deco robot that could talk and smoke cigarettes, and looking at a machine that basically predicted the next 80 years of human leisure. This was the Nimatron, and it's the brainchild of nuclear physicist Edward Condon. Condon actually got the idea during a lunch break while discussing Geiger counters. He realized the same scaling circuits used to detect radiation could be used to represent the numbers in a game of NIM. The machine they built was a beast, 8 feet tall, 3 feet wide, and weighing over a metric ton. It was packed with 116 electromagnetical relays and over 2 miles of copper wire. And this is where it gets a little psychological. Because Nim is a solved mathematical game, the Nimatron's logic could calculate its winning move in mere milliseconds. But the designers realized that humans would find this instant defeat humiliating and demoralizing. So they did something revolutionary. They added a delay relay to make the machine look like it was thinking for a few seconds before moving. Condon later called this the first deliberate slowing down of a computer. Over 100,000 games were played during its 6-month run, and the Nimatron won about 90,000 of them. If you were one of the rare geniuses to win, the machine would spit out a middle token stamped with NimChamp on the front and Westinghouse on the back. Condon actually considered the machine the biggest failure of his career because he saw it only as a novelty and a gag thing, never realizing that the binary logic he used would soon form the backbone of the digital revolution. On April 4th, 1975, in Albuquerque, New Mexico, 2 childhood friends named Bill Gates and Paul Allen officially incorporated a company they called Microsoft, a portmanteau of microcomputer and software. They didn't start in a glass tower. They lived and worked out of the Sundowner Motor Lodge, a mid-century modern motel on Route 66 near the headquarters of MITS, the makers of the Altair 8800 computer kit. Their life was pure, scrappy startup. Paul Allen would hang out in the cafe at the Durham Central Pharmacy eating Hatch Green chili enchiladas, while Bill Gates survived on fast food, Tang orange drink mix, and his first big splurge, a Porsche 911. To get their big break, they famously called the head of MITS and claimed they already finished a version of the basic computer programming language for the Altair computer. The truth? They hadn't written a single line yet. They spent the next 8 weeks in a coding marathon, sometimes working 20 hours straight. At one point, they were even dumpster diving outside nearby laboratories just to find discarded printouts with secret computer codes. Their first product was Altair Basic, sold on cassette for $350. The first year, they made a total of $16,005. But by providing a simple language that regular people could use to write programs, they effectively invented the software domain and gave hobbyists the tools to create the very first PC games. Finally, let's talk about the merger that rocked the RPG world on April 1st, 2003. Because of the date, most fans and even some gaming magazines assumed it was a massive April Fool's prank. But the reality was much more intense. Square and Enix had been bitter rivals for decades, competing for the hearts of JRPG fans everywhere. The merger was actually discussed as far back as 2000, but it was derailed in 2001 when Square's CGI film, Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, bombed so spectacularly that it nearly bankrupted the company. Enix got cold feet and backed away from the deal. Square was only saved by a massive capital injection from Sony, who bought an 18.6% stake in the company to keep it afloat. By 2002, thanks to the success of Final Fantasy X and Kingdom Hearts, Square recovered enough that the merger was back on the table. There was even boardroom drama over the math. The merger was almost canceled a second time when Square's majority stockholder Masafumi Miyamoto complained that the exchange ratio undervalued Square. They eventually settled on a ratio of 0.85 Enix shares for every 1 Square share. When they eventually tied the knot on April 1st, 2003, new CEO Yoichi Wada introduced the polymorphic content strategy. The idea that they shouldn't just make games, but turn every hit into a lifestyle, with anime, manga, and movies to get all the juice possible out of their IPs. What a week! From a one-ton mechanical brain beating its opponents in 1940 to the multi-billion-dollar merger of the world's biggest RPG makers, the turn of April is truly the reset button for the industry. Thank you so much for joining me for this week in video game history. I hope you enjoyed this look at the foundations of our favorite hobby. If you're out there hunting for an original Metal Slug AES cartridge, I wish you and your wallet the best of luck. If you like this episode on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. It helps me reach more gamers like us who still remember when Square and Enix were two separate companies. You can also find this podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcast. Artwork for the show is done, as always, by MizTink. Music for the show is done by the talented Shane Madani. Make sure you check out his new album, To Your Health, on Spotify right now. Be sure to save your game, and I'll see you next week.